Whether you loved it, hated it, or still haven't made your mind up about it, we've got 5 films for you to watch after Francis Ford Coppola's crazy Megalopolis. We've got a wide range of films here. We've got a Coppola film that you might not know, and if you watch till the end, we'll reveal the films that he himself has said inspired Megalopolis. Francis Ford Coppola's grand attempt at a magnum opus has flopped at the box office. It's made just $10 million against its budget of $120 million, which Coppola funded himself. It's quite a messy film. It picks up ideas and threads, follows them for a bit, and then drops them and picks something else up. There's no doubt that it's visually stunning, but I personally don't think it quite hit the mark. It definitely had ideas of grandeur, but it struggled to pull all of these threads together with what was quite a poor ending, I thought. I, for one, would much rather see films like this that try and do something great than ones that kind of sit comfortably within genres. So without further ado, let's get on to the 5 films you should watch after watching Megalopolis. The first film we're suggesting is Terry Gilliam's farcical Brazil. It's a retro-futurist vision of the future, which is run by bureaucracy and authoritarianism. It's kind of Kafka meets 1984 meets Monty Python. It's sort of funny, but not quite a comedy. It seems there's substance in every single line. Every image is symbolic of something else, and it's a really thought-provoking film, especially in its world building at the start. I wasn't quite sure what looks dated because the film was made in the 80s and what's supposed to look dated because it's kind of this retro-futurist approach to the future in which we're wholly reliant on machines which are kind of breaking down all the time. Personally, I thought the anxieties that it touches on are still relevant today. These concerns over machines could easily be mapped onto sort of fears around the rise of AI. That's a very current subject, and it touches on the subject that a lot of sci-fi does go into, this idea of the quality of life getting lower as technology advances. It's got the grandeur of Megalopolis, some pretty crazy dream sequences, and a cityscape that's really interesting and supposedly quite influential. I know that Tim Burton based his Gotham in his Batman film on this kind of aesthetic. If you're interested in these ideas of social decline, questions about society's future, and enjoyed the grandeur of Megalopolis, then Brazil is definitely the first stop for you to watch. For our next film, we're going even further back in the history of sci-fi to Fritz Lang's seminal Metropolis. Visually, it's way ahead of its time. Its sort of depiction of this grand futuristic cityscape is quite amazing when you place in the context in which it was made. If you enjoyed the sweeping cityscapes and grand narratives of Megalopolis, you'll love this. It is a silent film. It's quite long. I watched it in 2 parts recently. It's not the easiest watch, but it does feel like you're getting a sort of education in the history of film cinema, as pretentious as that might sound. It's very engaged in class politics, which wasn't what I expected when I went to the film for the first time. It does have a much clearer statement than Megalopolis. If you enjoy stories about those who run society and rising underclasses, it's definitely worth a watch, especially being in the 1920s with the sort of rise of fascism and various political movements around Europe. It's definitely engaged in those. For a film that's nearly 100 years old, I feel like some of its themes are still really universal and relevant today. This idea of a 2-tiered society, fear of technological development at the expense of human well-being, and the greed and barbarity of the ruling classes all are really sort of fundamental to this film. It does have a bit of a neat bow-tied ending, but maybe that's what we should expect from a film from the 1920s. If you're interested in the sci-fi element of Megalopolis, as well as how to sort of rule a big city and big grand narratives, it's definitely one to watch for any sci-fi fans out there that want to understand what have influenced many other films that they enjoy. Next, we're moving on to The Fountainhead. This is a story of a genius solo architect who has to fight against a world of stasis and conformity to get his brilliant and groundbreaking buildings constructed. Sound familiar at all? From both the plot perspective, the subject matter, and thematically, this is a huge, perhaps the biggest inspiration on Megalopolis. It is on Coppola's list of the 20 films that inspired him, and I'll touch on that again later. Perhaps it's a bit obvious in its statements, maybe that's what we should expect from a film from this era, but it's about the stifling nature of society and idolises personal gratification, individuality and integrity above all else, whilst demonising any form of collectivism. This isn't exactly the same statement as Megalopolis though, as in The Fountainhead, the solution for a better future is through the absolute freedom of a few geniuses. Its optimism comes in the belief that this will benefit humanity rather than exploit the vulnerable. Whether you agree with that or not, I don't know, but this film was definitely an interesting watch to think about those sorts of themes. It's an Ayn Rand novel. If anyone's come across any of her literature, whether that's fiction or non-fiction, this is like hyper-individualistic philosophy. She's got books named The Virtue of Selfishness and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, so you can see what kind of ideas we're dealing with here. This is definitely echoed in the film. Whilst I don't think I agree with the doctrine, I enjoyed the film and it did present this in sort of quite an engrossing way. You feel yourself on the side of this individual genius architect. The Fountainhead is a great watch if you're interested in this dynamic between a stifling state and the individual pursuit of sort of genius and excellence and how that drives society forward. This might be a bit more niche, but if you're interested in cinema that explores the physical constructions of the modern city space and the ideas around that, then this is also a film, even though it is from the 40s, that touches on those and I found quite interesting in that element. So now we're going to touch on the only Coppola film on the list, which is not The Godfather, it's not Apocalypse Now, it's not even One from the Heart, which I know a lot of people have cited as being similar to Megalopolis. I didn't put it on the list, but it very nearly made it, and it is one to watch watch if you're interested in sort of Coppola's sweeping cityscapes. Instead, I've chosen to include The Cotton Club. If you're interested in the personal stories of Megalopolis, and I did think this was one of the film's stronger points, at least till those sort of rivalries just seem to fall apart at the end, then I think the power dynamics in this film is something you might be interested in, especially as those relate to sort of governing physical space. This film's set in the eponymous 1920s jazz club. It's a great watch. There's loads of music in it, and also in terms of sort of costume and set design, Coppola takes us back to a 1920s jazz club. Another thing I really did enjoy about Megalopolis was the sets and the visuals, which I think most people did. Whilst it's not quite as grand and doesn't have the great special effects, I also think Coppola really effectively puts us in another world in the Cotton Club, so definitely worth a watch. Mario Puzo worked on the story, so obviously there's a really strong writer there. I love this film. I love spending time in the Cotton Club. It's really worth the watch, especially if it's one you haven't seen before. And finally, and this one might be a bit of a surprise or a curveball to some people, but I have included V for Vendetta. Probably a film a lot of people have seen, but I think if you're interested in the politics of Megalopolis, this film is definitely worth a watch or a rewatch if you've watched it previously. I love the mapping of like the Roman fall into American society in Megalopolis. I think V for Vendetta does that sort of thing as well. It takes the sort of Guy Fawkes narrative, sets it in a sort of futuristic London, but that London kind of looks a bit Victorian. I really enjoy that element of that film. Obviously, V for Vendetta is inherently incredibly political. It's a bit clearer with its anti-establishment statements than Megalopolis is, but I still think there's an intelligence and a nuance there. I don't think it's as simple as just being anti-establishment, especially if you watch it. Maybe it might be a film you watch when you're younger and you sort of go back when you're a little bit older. Perhaps that was my experience of it. I think I've mentioned this before. I felt Megalopolis was really let down at the end. It was constant setup, lots of different story threads, and in the end, for me, just completely fell flat on its face. If you agree and want a film with an excellent ending, which both has a clear political statement, which is also quite emotional and grabs you in that way, I definitely think V for Vendetta is something worth watching. It sort of builds towards this finale. You don't quite know what that's going to be. I won't spoil it for anybody that's watched it, but the finale of that film is up there with the best in British cinema, I'd say. It's a really, really excellent, powerful, call to arms end to a film, whatever you want to call it. So I have mentioned as well that there are 20 films Coppola has stated inspired Megalopolis. I only included one in this list. I didn't want to just go and pick 5 from there and talk about those. I'd rather pick a few that I thought would be interesting to talk about and relevant to the things of Megalopolis that stood out for me. But if you want to go and check that list out, and I'd highly recommend it, all you've got to do is go to Letterboxd, search up Francis Ford Coppola, and the list will come up. It's really, really interesting. He's got another list on there of like films he thinks are great, but these ones which he says inspired Megalopolis, I think is really interesting to look at. So go and check that out. But before you do, one more important thing: like this video, subscribe. We're getting a few more videos out now. Hopefully people are enjoying them. The guys that are watching it, we really, really appreciate it. I know the numbers aren't crazy, but it's great to see some people are enjoying what we're doing. So we're gonna keep doing it. Like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.